Mr. Chapman, it's not bad. We're going to get you on before 8.
Before my bedtime.
And the usual 5 minutes. The light will change to orange when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Paul Chapman. I live at 555 Franklin Street in Nanaimo Territory, and I am the Executive Director of the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust, also known as NALT. Before I start, I'd like to thank Your Worship for the kind words you spoke during the Mayor's report about the passing of our foundational members, Gail Adrian and Barbara Hurston. They will be missed. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to Councillor Gesselbruck's motion. A number of you are registered to attend the 3rd Annual Symposium on Water Stewardship and Changing Climate, presented as Watershed Moments, a video trilogy. The presentations will speak to what is being done, how we sustain our collective efforts, and what we can do. The content of the symposium may be quite useful when you are contemplating riparian protections, other green infrastructure initiatives, and eco-asset management. So there, I've plugged the symposium. And I should say that at times I'm certainly going to sound preachy, but this is supposed to be, this is meant as part celebration, part sermon. So I'll take it from there.
Sounds like the mayor.
Many times, I and other members of our community have stood here to implore city councils to uphold a broad interpretation of Nanaimo's riparian area protections to reflect the guidance of our official community plan, our OCP. To protect the various values supported in riparian setbacks, including the sense of place that our tall creekside trees embody, the de facto wildlife corridors accommodated by intact riparian setbacks, the rich biodiversity of riparian and riverine systems, and the ecological services, flood control, drought mitigation, that these areas can provide with sufficient protection and restoration. These are the environmental and community values realized in riparian zones. Over the years, a number of reasons have been provided for allowing variances to riparian protection for development. It has become apparent that our riparian protections aren't designed to meet community expectations as expressed in our OCP. The bylaws allow for a very narrow interpretation of habitat, only as it relates to fish, and only in consideration of a stream already impacted by intentional and unintentional consequences of development and practices. Councillor Gesselbach's proposal is a step in the right direction. Recognizing intact and protected riparian areas for all the values they support brings these protections closer to alignment with our OCP. This is a step towards systemic change rather than situational riparian variance decision-making. The 3-minute situational decision you make when you approve of riparian variance will last as a development footprint for 80 years plus. Systemic change is needed. The language of the OCP adopted by the city provides guidance. The declaration of a climate emergency gives urgency to our need to change. We need to look at all of our policies, procedures, and practices through a climate emergency lens. We need to ask, does this decision lead to mitigation of or adaptation to climate change in support of a resilient community? So again, tonight you are considering a step in the right direction of what is a longer journey. The expansion of riparian protection is one step. Ultimately, we need a thorough review of the development approval process through a climate emergency lens. We need to meet the expectations of our community as spelled out in the OCP, while providing some certainty to what is expected of developers and developments in our city. We need to put some urgency into our climate change emergency. We're not talking about preserving ecosystems and green infrastructure in an environment of abundance. We are operating in a profoundly altered landscape in a time of climate upheaval. There is a timeline where it'll be too late to protect what we have, and we will need to look to restore what we've lost with increased commitments of time, effort, and expense. The decision you make tonight is a climate change decision. Thank you for your consideration of this motion, for your time, and for bumping me up the agenda. Thank you.
And I'm touched and impressed that you only used 4 minutes. Thank you very much. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Gesselbrock? No?
Mayor?
Yes, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. Paul, if I may, the last time council had a conversation, and we looked at some variances to the riparian area there. It was, you remember the place in Stevenson Point area. And that posed a bit of a conundrum because the property had been created long before riparian areas became as they are today. What would you recommend that we do in cases like that? Do you have some ideas on that?
Yes, I do have some ideas. I think that, if you're going to give a variance to something in a riparian area, I'd rather see it to the footprint of the building and how you could be creative with that. And I also think that there are properties where we'd have to look and see, is that of such vital importance to, say, as an eco-asset, that's worth securing as city property for its eco-asset and its other values as well.
And NALT goes around buying property too, don't they? Is that something that you would consider as well?
It's certainly something we could talk about.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm not highly knowledgeable in this area, but I've been advised that when they do look at the riparian, a lot of times they look at the time of year and they don't look at the fact, could that creek or whatever be brought back? Because there may be no fish in. Would that be a recommendation to you that we should be looking at piece of lake or river, creek, whatever, be remediated? Would that be something you would recommend, or?
Yeah, I think, I think Councillor Gesselbrecht's motion speaks to this, and it's when we get a qualified environmental professional look at the creek, it's looking at it the state it exists now, and in that state it can be very degraded. Whereas historically it might have been what would have been a healthy creek and may have supported a population of salmon or other things. And so I think we should look at the possibilities of a creek, and also in terms of not just as habitat, but as eco-assets for flood mitigation and flood control and drought mitigation as well.
Thank you very much.
No one else? Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman.
Called question.
Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Yeah, thank you.
Your Worship, I would like to move that the city's regulatory framework for watercourses be reviewed and revised as part of the reimagined process in order to improve the protection of city watercourse riparian areas for the full range of the important environmental and community benefits they provide.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Councillor Thorpe, do you want to speak to it, please? Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, if I could speak to this, I think the Reimagine OCP update process is the time to review and revise key city policies. Watercourses are natural assets that provide essential benefits and services to the community. As outlined, they play important roles in supporting biodiversity through fish and wildlife habitat. They provide essential hydrological services such as water purification, storage, drainage. And finally, they provide community health benefits through access to nature and urban settings. It is in our best interest as a community to review our regulatory framework for watercourses and ensure that we're protecting these natural assets. Some issues that I outlined in the briefing note that I think need attention is first, the protection objectives in DPA 1 don't capture the full value of the benefits watercourses provide. For example, there's no mention of the hydrological services nor the community health benefits. Second, as currently applied, the guidelines of DPA 1 can undermine the tool's ability to meet protection objectives. For example, the methodology to determine riparian setbacks only assess for fish habitat. Also, how currently applied, the no net loss principle can in fact lead to permanent habitat loss by overvaluing the impacts of invasive removal and streamside planting in remediation. And then third, the development permit area as a tool may not be the most effective means to protect watercourse riparian areas and shield the municipality from legal risk resulting from lot sterilization. The point being brought up of potentially looking at a home plate methodology that is used in ALR. So I've written these concerns in details. I think also it's important to review and revise this watercourse regulatory framework in light of the increasing impacts and considerations that climate change are posing. There's new information and modeling out of what the impacts on streams and their important role for mitigation and resiliency in the face of climate change, and these need to be taken into consideration too. I think the example of the last situation with the Stevenson Point case, in fact, there were riparian regulations in place when that lot was created, and we saw the erosion of that. And I think it's just an example that there is some things that we do need to look at. So I hope Council can support this, this motion, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I just need some clarification here on the wording. And I note in the wording in front of us on the screen, the word is the framework be revised. And I heard Councillor Geselbrock use that word, and I also heard him use the word reviewed. I would probably support a review with information coming back to Council with the ramifications of this, because it does impact our development approval process. It impacts possible concern for developers, and they might be legitimate or not, but I think each case is unique, and I think that's the approach I would like to take on this. So when I see the wording that just says that we revise our policy in accordance with what Councillor Geselbrock is suggesting, then I could not support that wording. If it is a review, again, as I stated earlier, with a report coming back to Council on the ramifications of this, then I would support that. So I don't know if I can get clarification on that from Councillor Geselbrock. I see he's wanting to.
Councillor Geselbrock.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe. I did change the wording to say review and revise. I think that review is to look back at what we had and how it's working, and I think that there is definite need for revisions to occur, and I outlined that the objectives in the DPA guidelines are missing some key protection values around hydrological services, drought mitigation, and community health benefits, along with key parts in the guidelines of how this regulatory framework and the DPA is applied, which is specifically how the setbacks are determined through the provincial SPIA methodology, and how that does not protect adequate area, and also how the no net loss principle is applied, and specifically that the application's principle says that it's okay to permanently remove some areas of the riparian area for development if what's left is restored through removal of native invasive plants and plantings, and I think that that actually erodes the ability to protect sufficient land. So I definitely would like to see a revision as part of the direction to staff. So the current wording as the motion that I'm moving is saying to review and revise.
If I may, Your Worship, thank you, Councillor Geselbrock. I guess I'm not sure that that satisfies my my hesitation on this. What I'm looking for is an assurance that staff will be coming back to Council with suggested changes, possible revisions that we could consider in more detail and at more length, rather than just going away and coming back with a revised policy and saying, here it is. So do a review, let us have a look at it and debate it further then.
I imagine there'll be a process around that, but maybe other council members would like to speak to this.
I'm hesitant to get into a back and forth between
No,
two
no, I'm
councillors. Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Your Worship. As this is the development permits are within the OCP, any changes to the regulation would require an OCP amendment and all that goes with it. So that would be council review, public input. So I assume this would be brought forward as potential changes for council's consideration with the OCP update. And if that's incorrect, Mr. Lindsay can chime in and tell me I'm wrong. But with respect to this motion, I just want to say I absolutely support it. I think the tension here is that the demands of what is I think, required in the world that we live in exceed what the intention of this development permit when it was written, and that, I think the city of Nanaimo has been very progressive and ahead of the curve on the protection of riparian rights, and I think that's great and should be celebrated and built upon in comparison to so many jurisdictions. But I think the reality is that even our best efforts have significantly failed. Between 1970 and 2016, we've seen a global biodiversity loss of 68%. And North America isn't excluded in that. We're not as high as 68%, but I don't have the number on me, but it's just shocking and devastating. So we need to be doing everything we can. I think the scope of these regulations, like I was saying, need to be expanded beyond just riparian and looking at the full ecological function of what our water courses mean to animals and animal life and insects and all those sorts of things. And that's, to me, what's at loss as the slow incremental changes happen with development. And we're going to be limited with our authority, but I do think within that authority we can make restrictions and even just slight improvement, because so much damage has already been done, is better than none. So with that said, I fully support it. I support the expanded scope that I think is intended in the briefing paper that you provided, and I would look forward to that discussion and that consideration as we go through the Reimagine Nanaimo process.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Lindsay, did you?
He has to answer the question that was raised.
Sorry?
There was a question of him raised by Councillor Brown.
Sorry. Mr. Lindsay.
Sorry if I just understood. The question was, would this be coming forward as part of a bylaw members of the OCP? So the quick answer is yes, this sits in the official community plan and finally would need to be adopted by council as any bylaw would.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question through to staff regarding the Reimagine process. I'm in support of the motion. I'm in support of ensuring that our policies fit the city we want to build. But I'm a little worried that we're using Reimagine as kind of a catch-all for all of our engagement. And if you could provide comment on whether this could be easily integrated within the Reimagine Nanaimo process that is, I think, 5 months underway and staff has devoted significant time to. Can it fit?
So, Your Worship, and when staff see a motion like this, we're interpreting it as fitting under the umbrella of Reimagine. So Reimagine is for us the public engagement tent that all of these policy documents reside under. So we're through that public engagement, but ultimately, at some point in the process, we'll shift to bylaw drafting, including a new official community plan. So it would be at that point that we would be, I think as Councillor Brown was suggesting, we'd automatically be reviewing all of our development permit guidelines because they are part of that bylaw. So we would interpret this as part of that overall review, that this be considered as part of specifically the official community plan creation.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. This is probably a question to staff, but I have a potential issue with it, and that is whether the grandfathering is going to be included in the revision or in the proposal, and that would be of existing properties, both developed or undeveloped, that would now fall offside if we expanded. And I think of an example of somebody who currently's backyard falls outside of the distance, and all of a sudden with the new revision that comes in, the backyard is now within the riparian area, which means I'm assuming if they wanted to build a garden shed in that area, they could no longer do so. So I'm struggling with supporting this based on no knowledge of whether consideration is going to be given to grandfathering or not. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I think this highlights for me why it might be helpful, kind of a two-step process. And I think if council were to pass this, I think it would be helpful, first of all, to come back with council with a report just with some commentary around some of the assumptions that are being made. I think staff would appreciate that opportunity. But as we understand, just to most importantly clarify our understanding, because the way I would interpret this motion and what I've heard from Councillor Geselbrecht is primarily not necessarily increasing riparian areas, that might come out as part of the review, but more about how we evaluate variances within the existing riparian areas. And I hope that's correct. Because I think it's really important for council to understand, and I think Councillor Brown spoke to this, I mean, the city has a long-standing history of protecting watercourses. So since 1996, your bylaw has said if you're creating a new lot in the city, it's going to be 100% exclusive of the watercourse leaf strips we have. So the vast majority of those subdivisions you do not see. They do not come before council. They're just created, and those lots are completely exempt. What you do find, and coming before council, and the example in Stevenson Point, is an application where there is a historic lot, and it does no longer complies with the bylaw of the day. And the remedy for that, for a property owner, is to seek variance either through, depending on the nature of the bylaw, through Board of Variance, or through council, through a development permit. So regardless of what bylaw regulations you put in place, that remedy will always exist for property owners, and council will always see applications before them. If I understand the suggestion is, it's the guidelines that we would evaluate those applications under, making sure that they reflect upon not just fish habitat, but the entire benefits and ecosystem of watercourse riparian areas. So, but again, I think a report back from staff just clarifying and confirming those statements, I think would be helpful.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. This seems very tied to a decision we made regarding Stevenson Point, and I'm really okay with that because that was a very complex decision, and I want to make sure that when we're faced with another decision like that, that we have a better understanding of what we're being asked to decide on and how it all fits together. So I personally would appreciate staff commentary on this, particularly because this is a 5-page, very technical document, and I thank Councillor Geselbrecht for it. It's wonderful. I would appreciate some staff reflection on some of the ideas put forward. So I understand we have a motion on the floor, and I guess I would look for direction as to how or when I would request a staff report related to this.
Ms. Gurry?
I'm hesitant to suggest motions to you this evening anymore.
I appreciate that.
I would possibly suggest Councillor Hemmons would make a motion to defer this motion to come after a report from staff regarding the implications and potential outcomes that Councillor Geselbrecht foresees happening with this discussion, and then the motion would be considered after a staff report with the implications first, or possibly Mr. Lindsay has a better idea.
Your Worship, I think Ms. Gurry summarized my thinking on it very well, and I think it would, anytime council has a motion, I think it's important that council understand what the intent is so we can deliver on it. So in this case, I think just that opportunity to go back, clarify some of the statements, and then confirm the process that we would go through for any kind of review, because as mentioned, I think by others, there's a number of stakeholders that would want to have a voice in any kind of changes we did. Confirm that process, and then council could confirm, alter, deny that approach at that time, but we would appreciate that opportunity.
I don't even know the wording of the motion.
Possibly, Councillor Hemmons, defer consideration of the motion that's on the floor right now. Defer consideration of the motion until such time as staff come back with a report on the implications and, what's a good word? Implications and complexities surrounding this issue, and for a clear understanding. And then once that report is done, then council consider this motion.
Okay, I'm uncomfortable with deferring. because I recognize the importance of this, but I would like staff commentary on what's been provided. So I'll make the recommended motion.
Say that again.
I'll make the recommended motion as described by.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Turley. I'm going to let Councillor Gesselbrock speak to the, well, Councillor Hemmons first if she wishes to speak to the amendment, or yes? And I'll go to Councillor Gesselbrock and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. I think I can understand the need for more information on this, and staff's need to speak to some of the items that were in the briefing note that was provided. I think the motion is very clear about reviewing and revising the regulatory framework, and I think that's up to staff on how they want to play that process. As part of the review process, I would expect a staff report outlining some of the considerations and issues and reflections that need to be thought of as we proceed in this process, and that can be brought as a report to a GPC, to a council meeting. It can even be sent to a committee, and then that would be, the first process of this. Of reviewing this and revising this regulatory framework, and then the revision part will follow after that. And I think that it's redundant for a deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
I agree with Councillor Gesselbrock. He's asking for a report. So why are we asking for another report? That will be included in the report that we're supposed to be getting from staff, in my opinion. So I don't know why we would have a staff report to tell us that we're going to get a staff report. And that's how that motion reads to me, because part of what the staff report will be doing is just like on any other motion, they will sometimes bring us updates. This is where we're at, this is what we're doing. So I don't see any need for a deferral, because I'm quite confident that our staff will bring us the information as required. Or if we have concerns or questions on it, there's nothing from preventing us through going through Mr. Rudolph or Mr. Lindsay to request clarification. So I'm opposed to the deferral. I think this is something that needs to go. We're going to be starting budget. We're not going to have much time. Staff's not going to have a lot of time. So I'm opposed to the deferral.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I too won't be supporting the deferral. To me, through the OCP review process, I want to see, and I understand it to be happening or going to be happening, a review of all development permits to different extents. I'm more than happy to receive staff's feedback on this. I think it gives a pretty clear intention and something to respond to. So I'm very happy to wait until then, until there's a more comprehensive report on all the different development permits being looked at. I just expect, my expectation of this would be the thoughts here and the thoughts in the memo provided to council would be incorporated and responded to in some fashion. It may be in agreement, it may be in disagreement, that's fine, that's what we pay staff for. So I very much agree with Councillor Armstrong. I think it would be a staff report just outlining a process which I think can just be streamlined a bit and done at a later date as part of the whole OCP development permit review process.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I'm against deferral as well. And the reason being is because this is to be revised as part of the Reimagine process. My involvement, what little I had in the OCP, whenever it was, a decade and a half ago, was the OCP is a catch-all. That is the purpose of Reimagine, and it's to take as much information as we can gather in a broad spectrum and look to see where we're going to drive the city in the future. So I see this as definitely being part of Reimagine, and I support the original motion, so I'm against deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. So I think I may be misreading this. If Councillor Gesselbrock believes that staff at some point is going to have the opportunity to reflect on the 5-page backgrounder that we received through this process, then I'm happy to remove or rescind my motion. Could I have staff's affirmation, however, that that's how they see this, that at some point through this review and revision process, that we will have staff commentary on the information we've been provided in terms of the background to this?
Your Worship, and And sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to complicate this, because I'm not. I just want to have clarity. And I think there's a number of statements that are being made, and it's almost, if you read the background report, directing staff to make changes before we've started any kind of process. And that's the part that I'm struggling with, because normally we wouldn't start at the end. We would start with a process to review an application before we made assumptions. So I think I would just appreciate the opportunity to report back to council on some of those statements and assumptions that are being made, and provide some context and clarity around those, so that we can move forward on a process. If council was to approve this tonight, that's fine. We'll still continue on with our review, and at some point, whether it would be awkward to bring it forward just in the middle of the Reimagine OCP process. I would hope that there'd be an opportunity to bring something forward earlier, before we got into a consultation process with stakeholders on it. So there was an opportunity to actually have a discussion before we got too far into that engagement process.
Councillor Turley on the amendment.
Thank you, Your Worship. My challenge with Councillor Hammond's suggestion she's going to remove the deferral, because I won't support that as a seconder, is that the motion states that the city's regulatory framework for watercourses be revised. It doesn't say be reviewed, it says revised.
The motion is reviewed and revised.
That's not what it says on my page.
No, I changed it.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Turley, that is what it reads on your agenda. However, when he moved the motion this evening, he did revise it to include review and revise. So he added the word review. So it's on the screen. You're not looking, it's not going to be on the screen. It's just when he spoke it and moved it this evening that he used the word review.
Yeah, I'm still not comfortable with it, so anyway.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to say, I see this as the same way we did the Moses, where staff undertook a very comprehensive review. They brought it to the GPC. We had a really good discussion around it. We had some concerns. Staff dealt with the concerns and brought it back to the GPC, and then it came back to council. So that's how I see this process, the same way that Mr. Lindsay would like the opportunity to look at, this is what we're going. He comes forward back to a GPC, a scheduled GPC, saying, okay, we've looked at ABCD, whatever. Here's where we're moving. Then we have a discussion, say, well, we agree or disagree. I see it as the same process that we used with Moses, which I found very effective, and I thought it really helped staff and it helped us so that we got it all cleared before we even came to the council table for vote. So that's how I sort of see this, but I could be off base.
Councillor Gesselbrock. On the amendment.
Yeah, just some background. Initially, I would like to see that this DPA and our whole watercourse framework gets reviewed and revised. To me, whether it's part of the Reimagine process or not, it doesn't really matter. However, in speaking in earlier conversations that I've had with individuals, because we are reviewing our DPA as part of the OCP process, I thought that would be the easiest on staff to do it as part of the Reimagine process. But whether, I think that there's a difference in understanding of when we say review as part of the Reimagine process, what it exactly means to each individual here and what that actually looks like. But the intent is to review and revise the regulatory framework on watercourses. And so I think we can leave it to staff on how they want to step this process in going about it, but the intent is to review and revise the watercourse regulatory framework.
So you're speaking against Councillor Hammond's motion. Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship. I feel we're going around in a big circle again. And I understand Councillor Hammond's motion, and I think I'll support it just because I still think there's confusion over wording and the devil's in the details. And I hear Mr. Lindsay very clearly saying that staff would appreciate the opportunity to come back to council and give us their commentary on the proposed revisions and potential ramifications to other members in the community. So I want to see that happen, and I'm not sure if supporting Councillor Hemmons' deferral is the best way to see that happen, but I suspect it might be. Otherwise, if that does not pass, I still sense that that is the process that we'll be following by getting a report back to a GPC meeting. So I think we're all sort of heading in the same direction, but by different routes. And if Mr. Lindsay has anything else to further clarify or muddy the question, he's welcome to add to it.
Your Worship, I'm seeing a general nodding of heads around the table, so I don't want to lengthen this out any longer than it needs to be. If Council passes this motion, I think there'll be an opportunity, based on what I'm hearing tonight, to come back to GPC and have a discussion, and we'll try to do that earlier or as soon as possible.
Why do I feel like that passage from the Bible about the Israelites in the desert for, what was it, 40 years? 42 years, thank you. On Councillor Hemmons' motion, which is, Ms. Gurry, just read it again, please. Thank you.
To defer consideration of proposed motion until such time as staff can report back to council with implications and clarity on the process.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons, is it really necessary to say?
Well, I think it is, because if Mr. Lindsay just said that he read the will of council, then this motion is moot and we don't need it. I understand that Mr. Lindsay understands that we would like staff commentary on this.
I think.
Well, Your Worship, I wouldn't mind just voting on the deferral. If it fails, then you can vote on the main motion. I would prefer that.
I'm going to call the question.
Yeah.
On the motion, Councillor Hemmons' motion, all those in favor? Councillors Thorpe, Turley, and Krogh. Those opposed, Councillors Armstrong, Martman, Gesselbrock, Hemmons, Brown, and Bonner. On the main motion, all those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Thorpe, thank you very much. And Councillor Turley, sorry.